Hello, and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson House, our Lunch and Learn series on Tuesdays at noon. My name is Elizabeth Karcher, and I am the Executive Director of the Woodrow Wilson House. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's talk, which is actually, we have an advisory council member who's going to be doing an interview with an author of a book series. But before we get to that, let me tell you what's happening at the Woodrow Wilson House. We have extended our Suffrage Outside exhibition. It will be running through Thanksgiving, so please it's to come. There are still some very nice days ahead of us, and we will be open. It is free on Tuesdays and open late on Thursdays. And we are open every single day. So look online, book your ticket, and come visit us at the Woodrow Wilson House. We also have our walking neighborhood house tours and audio walking tour of Kalorama, which is available. You can log online and download that. You can do it at any time, as well as our Waddy Butler Wood tour. Once again, download it and it's yours to take the tour anytime you like. We will continue the Lunch and Learn speaker series. Next week, we are holding off. Everyone should please go vote. It's a big day in America, so please, we will not have our Lunch and Learn next Tuesday, but we will pick up the following Tuesday, and we'll have lots to talk about. I'll give you a heads up at the end of this session about who's coming next. And we also just want to let you know that we have a lot of events coming up at the Wilson House, including this Friday, an outdoor event for Halloween. It will be our vintage game night, 5:30 to 7 p.m. We invite you, if you're wearing a mask, let's make it a masquerade. Wear your costume for Halloween. Come for a cocktail vintage game night event in the garden. We have hired a food truck to come and bring some food. You can buy some food at the food truck and bring it to the rear garden to experience both vintage game night as well as the Suffrage Outside. So follow our webpage, see what's going on. I welcome you to come to the Wilson House. One other thing, we are starting to do virtual tours. So if you have a business or a company and you'd like to have a virtual tour of Suffrage Outside or any other part of the Wilson House, please give us a call. Call me or Sarah Andrews about scheduling a virtual tour. It's something that we are doing, and we're excited to extend that to our audiences. So with that, let me start and introduce our moderator and our interviewer today. Dr. Diana Mcrae is a member of the Advisory Council of the Woodrow Wilson House. She attended Tuskegee Veterinary School, and she graduated in 1976. Afterwards, she went on to serve at the Center for Veterinary Medicine, a part of the Food and Drug Administration, where she tested the safety and effectiveness of medicines for animals. She retired from public health service as a veterinarian after 33 years of service. She was then asked to join the Woodrow Wilson House and the Advisory Council 8 years ago, has been a member of the Advisory Council, and she is interested in Paris, fashion, animals, and World War I history. And that's why and politics, of course. And so we invited her to be our moderator today. So she will be speaking with Brenda Jones, who, along with Krishan Trotman, has written a series of biographies of queens of the resistance. So it's 4 different books about different queens of the resistance, and you'll learn a little bit more about that today. I welcome Brenda and I welcome Diana. So please.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Okay. Thank you for also the nice introduction of me. So Brenda, are you ready for us to get started with your questions?
I'm ready anytime you are, Diana.
All right. The first question is, how did you come up with the title Queen of Resistance? Are you a Beyonce fan?
Well, Let me say, I regret that my co-author could not be here, Krishan Trotman, because some of this is her creation. I think she's probably more the Beyonce fan than I am, but I do love and respect Beyonce in terms of her work as an artist. I probably veer more toward jazz as in terms of my interests, but I think Krishan could talk about why she felt it was great to put her in the book, because of course she is a queen bee. Sometimes people call her bee or bay, so that's where the reference to Beyonce comes from. The name Queens of the Resistance actually was almost like a lightning strike. Um, Krishan, our agent, and I were all talking about the book and the series we wanted to create, and somebody just said, "I think we should call it Queens of the Resistance," and the other two said, "That's it." So it was just one of those moments of clarity that comes infrequently during the creative process.
All righty. Well, it's pretty much you've answered the second question that I wanted to say. How did you come up with the series? So I think you've already answered that. Would you agree?
Well, no, let me tell you how we came up with the series, because this part is very important. Of course, the books came out this year in at the end of June. So of course, this 2020 is probably going to go down in history, in American history at the very least, as one of the most unique years in the history of our nation. And so there was a great deal that we could never have expected would have happened when we were planning these books to come out, um, which was about, I guess we were doing that probably in early 2019 is when we were really talking about these books and trying to see if anybody would be interested in publishing them. And at that time, I think we were deeply concerned that politics had become sort of a search and destroy mission instead of a, a debate, a national debate about where we should take this country somehow or the other. Being in the political ring meant subjecting yourself to a kind of uh, potential destruction that we just felt was wrong. And then, as women, we felt, especially after the campaign of Hillary Clinton, which, of course, people have the right to agree and disagree, but somehow we felt it took on this kind of monstrous proportion where um, incredible untruths were being lobbed at her and within the political process that we thought were wrong. Um, so we were saying to ourselves, what can we do? I'm a writer, Krishan's in the publishing industry. What could we do to contribute to a more balanced, more positive atmosphere? And what we decided was these four women um, should be um, should be celebrated in any political environment. Uh, Anybody who's the first woman Speaker of the House of Representatives, whether you agree with their politics or not, that is an incredible accomplishment. Or, um, Senator Warren, a who's running for president, one of the few women in American history who ran for president. All of these things are accomplishments that we felt, regardless of party, should be celebrated by Americans who could rally around their achievement, if not all of their ideas. So we wanted to create something that was unabashedly positive and celebratory, that engaged young women who maybe didn't know anything about these political candidates and only heard the negative side of the story. We wanted to give them something positive, to let them know these are women, they're just like you, they have many different, they face many of the challenges every woman faces, and this is how they overcame them, and they've made some tremendous contributions to our society, and those things should also be known and celebrated. So that is why we created these books, and so they are light and funny, and not the typical political book, so that we could get some audiences that may have been turned off to politics to engage in a different kind of way.
Well, that's very good. I'm glad we didn't miss out on that, what you just said. But anyway, let's go to the next question. How did you come up with the format of the book? Born, woman, leader, resistance, queen, format of your book, the chapters of your book. How did you come up with that?
Well, that was more of Krishan's creation. So she is an editor. She works for Hachette, which is a huge international publishing house in New York City. And she felt that what we needed to have is some kind of connection between the stories. So one of the things that creates that from an editorial standpoint is that structure, so that it helps the reader, but it also helped us too, in terms of organizing the material and creating the kind of format or compartment for each of the stories that we had to write.
All right. The next question is about Woodrow Wilson. You know, he ran as a progressive candidate.
Yes.
Do you think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is also progressive? Do you
Absolutely.
think Wilson would recognize OAC as a progressive?
I think Wilson would probably see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as a radical. I think, of course, she was a woman, so astounding to someone like Woodrow Wilson, in light of the fact that he had to deal with the suffrage movement and the feeling that women should be empowered. So he would be surprised and amazed, I think, that somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, especially at her age, could become a member of the House of Representatives. And I think he would see her not as a colleague, but as someone very much outside of what he viewed as progressivism. But I do think it's interesting, if they had to serve together in any kind of way, ultimately he may have found her, if he was open-minded enough, an ally on some of these issues of the working man. The interesting thing about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is that she is very much concerned about the issues of working people. And there are individuals who feel the Democratic Party is not as concerned about those issues as it used to be. So it could be that if Wilson was still the same kind of progressive he was then, in this time, that he might actually find her an ally. And that is what is so profound about the politics of this nation when it is operative, when we are in fact engaging in democracy. It creates the need and compels the need to negotiate, to find common ground among differences, and to craft legislation that is representative of people's needs.
Thank you. What do you see as the common thread among these leaders besides just being a woman? What do they have in common?
Wow. Okay, well, let me say this. I don't think everybody is clear. So Queens of the Resistance is a series of short biographies put in a light, funny sort of uh, format to introduce Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Chairwoman Maxine Waters, and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to the public, and especially to engage young women in the lives of these women. So this is one thing. Let us make clear who we are, whose stories we are telling. And let me see, what is the thread that connects them? Well, certainly they're all in politics. And what that means is that they are very interested in contributing to our society. And I think one of the things that these books make clear is that it is a sacrifice. To be engaged in our political process requires a great deal of focus, concentration, time away from your family and your personal life. And these women have all determined that they want to make a significant contribution to our society. And for all of those individuals who are similarly interested in changing, shaping, having a dynamic impact on America, politics is the place to do it. So I think it's important to assert the positive role and power of politics to be a contributor to American society. The other thing is, I think they are all deeply concerned about people. So each of them has dedicated their lives to a kind of study of the problems of people, and in a very in-depth way. And this makes them all four extremely prepared, very intelligent, very executive and capable of making tough decisions, and willing to be on the cutting edge, to be that leader that cuts through some of the resistance to assert a position in the world. And though they receive some vilification, they have the strength and the power to do that. Not everybody can do that, to take the heat of being on the front line. These women can do it. They are leaders.
Drew a blank. I was trying to think about the lady that represents DC, Washington, DC, in our statehood.
Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Eleanor Holmes. I think said Maxine Waters. Okay. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about her?
Well, Eleanor Holmes Norton is, I don't know whether you're suggesting that she might also be a queen of the resistance. I think a case could be made for her. She is a lawyer, incredibly intelligent and articulate, made significant contributions to the civil rights movement and to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the NAACP. In fact, I don't know how many of you all know the story of Medgar Evers, but Medgar Evers was an activist during the civil rights era for the NAACP in Mississippi, and was meeting with Eleanor Holmes Norton and had taken her to the airport in the evening. And that was the evening that he was killed by the Klan in Mississippi. So Eleanor Holmes Norton was very much involved on the front lines of civil rights, very much involved in the development of the March on Washington, and worked with Bayard Rustin in New York to do that, to do the organizing work necessary to create that historic march. And she's a DC native with a legacy in Washington. I think her father or grandfather was a lawyer also, and she has represented the District of Columbia for a long time in the US Congress. The DC vote was taken away. There was a time when the District of Columbia had a vote, and she was a voting representative. I think that was during the Gingrich era in Congress, that the vote for DC residents was taken away. So actually, residents of Washington, DC do not have voting representation in Congress, something they are still fighting for. She's a great woman who's made an incredible contribution to this country as well.
I definitely feel that she should be one of your queens.
Well, I hear your advocacy for that. I'm gonna put that in the computer and see what comes out. Thank you for the recommendation.
So what audience do you feel your book appeals to?
Well, it is interesting. So the books are published by Random House, and the publishing house, the part of Random House that published these books is Plume. And Plume is sort of a young, hip kind of imprint for Random House. So we were trying to appeal to young women who would never, ever pick up a book, a 300-page biography of Nancy Pelosi, for example, to engage them in a sort of fun, different way so they can feel that politics isn't dry or dull or content heavy, but has some lightness and fun about it. So I think it appeals most heavily to women from maybe teenagers, older teenagers, up to women about 40 years old. But they are, I think, they could appeal to anybody who just wants to firstly learn about the biographies of these women. They are much more in depth than we think they are. We see these women almost as caricatures. You see them on the news and they're, made fun of, or, they're castigated or grilled by journalists. What you don't know is about their lives. You don't know, for example, that Nancy Pelosi didn't even get into politics until she had raised almost all of her children. So she was a mother first and a wife. She has been married for many decades, has a successful and very viable marriage, something that a lot of women can't pull off. So in many ways, she has it all: a powerful career, a committed and dedicated husband, a family, and her way of managing all of that was to raise her family first. And then she went into politics, and her children are very supportive of her work. So that's something we didn't know about her. We just kind of see her as sort of a punching bag, but actually she's an incredible person from Baltimore, Maryland. They're always talking about the fact that she's from the West Coast. Her husband was from the West Coast. She's from Baltimore, and she comes from a political family. Her father was a member of the House of Representatives, as well as mayor of Baltimore, very esteemed Italian American immigrants. And so you can learn the story of who she actually is, instead of, some of these kind of superficial ways of looking at her. Or Elizabeth Warren, who has been studying why American families fail financially her entire career. She has dedicated her life to coming to understand what happens to American families that makes them fall into financial despair. Why? Because she had two parents who were born in Oklahoma. When they got out of high school and got married, shortly thereafter, the Great Depression started. I think a lot of young people now talk about how our economy is not what it should be, etc. Imagine leaving high school, getting married, embarking on what you think is going to be the great adventure of partnership, and running into the stock market crash in 1929 and the Great Depression that ensued. Also, they were in Oklahoma, and so they were a part of the Dust Bowl. They weren't in they didn't experience the most difficult part of it. They were sort of to the west, but this was a time in American history when 800,000 tons of dust blew from the Midwest all the way over to the East Coast. Farms in her community and in parts of Oklahoma, where I'm sure she had friends and family members, were totally covered in dust. And there was nothing these families could do. Most of them left. So in the middle of the Depression, also, they were debilitated by this Dust Bowl. And for most of Elizabeth Warren's parents' marriage, they were struggling to manage these great difficulties. And so in her life, she became a financial lawyer so that she could begin, and she has written books about what happens to Americans in some of these financial crises and how they manage and what we should do about them. This is one reason why she was able to create the Consumer Protection Bureau, because she wanted Americans to be protected from the incursion of capitalism into their lives that destroys, sometimes American families in its most negative representations. So I'm just saying that to say that these women have much more depth that they bring to the table. And if you're interested in finding out about their lives in an easy and fun way, you should read these books, because you will discover that there's much more to them and that their contributions are much greater, much deeper than we would ever discover on, say, television or radio or inside the political process.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that.
Thank you, Diana.
Keeping with the series, are there any other women leaders that you would like to add to the books?
Well, it's interesting, and I wish Krishan was here to say, I probably am a bit tougher in terms of my view of who should be added. But if we get a vice president who becomes a woman, then I think she might be added. That's the only person at this moment that I'm thinking of, but I think we would be open to other suggestions from people if they think folks should be added. And it really all is up to you. If the publishing house sees that you all are enthusiastic about these books and like them, then they may say, hey, why don't we add to this?
Right. Well, do you think of yourself as a queen of resistance in some ways?
Well, I would not call myself a queen either a queen or a queen of the resistance.
Mm-hmm.
I see myself as an observer. I'm a writer and a thinker and a person who likes to process my view of reality and try to translate that for other people to enrich their thoughts or their ideas about who we are as Americans or as a world community. So I certainly, though, appreciate the queens of the resistance and people who are resisting any kind of uh, movement um, to that that restricts respect for human dignity. I feel very strongly about the need that our lives and our society, and we are fortunate in American society that we have a document that does assert the power and the need to respect human dignity. And so I am for any kind of resistance to any infringement on that. Other than that, I think that's about as far as I can go down that road. I would not call myself a queen of resistance, but I appreciate the queens of the resistance.
Right. Well, Brenda, let's turn the meeting over to Elizabeth now and see if she has any questions from other people.
Okay. Well, I can say, Diana, you are an incredible host because you got us, your timing is impeccable. You what are your thoughts about these ladies, Diana?
Well, I think they're outstanding, and I'm following them very closely every day on CNN. That's my,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm usually like reading about the suffrage women and President Wilson's wives and the older group of women. I like that, 19th century stuff, that kind of history stuff.
That is very interesting. And actually, I wonder, do you see linkages between these women and the suffrage movement? Because ultimately, of course, they benefit significantly from the
Right.
work that the women in Wilson's era did. Why? Because they are all elected representatives and women vote for them, weigh in on their ability to do their work. And for some of them, particularly Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi, the women's movement were very involved, the modern day women's movement were very involved in making sure that they became elected. So there is absolutely a direct lineage between those women and the women of today. What I think is even more fascinating are the ideas that women are still fighting for from 1920 all the way up to today, that we still have not, we haven't relieved ourselves from. So the suffragettes, you probably know more about this than I do, were vilified. They were people did not appreciate their advocacy. And what we find today is an interesting surrealism almost in the negative commentary about women, that women who are in the political arena, that does not relate to their ideas or their executive leadership. Of course, all of those things are fair game in the political process, but a sort of outsized, surreal way that they are criticized, that I would think probably links back to the suffragette movement, that somehow suggests women who stand up, speak out, are not really women, are more, are somehow more masculine women, or are, sometimes they're even compared to animals. I mean, I hate to say that, but they are characterized in these monstrous ways. And that is something we have not moved beyond yet, which is very interesting. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi there, I'm back. I'm here. I hear you the whole time, which is I had trouble getting back in. I had a question on that as well, and that is, do you think our political process, where we go through the primaries, and we have someone like Elizabeth Warren, that process of fighting to the top, sometimes is taking other people down? Do you what? And I realized that be part of the queen of the resistance is to make yourself and sacrifice yourself to get to the top, and to be part of it. Talk to me a little bit about what you see as that process and how it affected these women, or how these women managed to rise above it. Um,
Well, I think takedown politics is a part of where we are today. And I have to tell you, we as the American people have a role in this. If we were not to respond to, or responded negatively to negative advertising, these caricatures of people, even lies that are told inside the political process, they would not happen. So I'm not saying we're responsible for these things happening, but it's our reaction to them that helps to propagate them, because negative advertising works. All you have to do is cast aspersions. They can be untrue in the political process, but it is a way to take out an opponent. That is unfortunate and is not really a viable part. It's not a sustainable part of the democratic political process. And I think if we, the people, were to say, stay on the issues, get out of this personal territory, or to reject these kinds of ads, they would disappear, because they would no longer be effective. So I think part of what we need to do, it's hard for us to control the political ad guys, but the way that we can weigh in is to be informed about the issues, and to demand that people inside the political ring stay on those issues, talk about the issues that are germane to us. And if we made that demand, then things would change.
That's somewhat of perhaps a teaser, but one of our talks that will be coming up in November and perhaps in December is about fake news, the elections, propaganda, and information of that. So you're absolutely right. If we need to demand to have the truth and not fake news, and be able to make our decisions. But I agree. We need to have that. And we also need to have the conversation about what it is to have fake news out there in our environment, and how do we decipher what's real and what's not real in order to make our decisions in the political process. I am going to go to some of the questions that have come in. Brenda, have you ever considered that you might use some of these books for middle school or high school education? I think that they're terrific for, as you said, for the younger set. Have you seen that as something you could market to?
Yes, absolutely. And there are people who have purchased the books for the sake of advising young women about politics and engaging them in the political process. Absolutely. Yes, we would love to do that.
If this is from Chris Keller, also on our advisory council. So Chris asks, if the Democrats retain control of the House of Representatives, should Nancy Pelosi remain as Speaker? acknowledging that her talents are irreplaceable, should she nonetheless make way for younger members to broaden the public face of the party? What's your thought on that?
Well, what I will say, we didn't get a chance to mention the fact that I worked in the House of Representatives for 16 years with Congressman John Lewis. And I'm going to give you an answer that he would give to this. And that is that leaders are not appointed, they emerge from a group of people. They somehow make it clear that they are the individuals who needs to lead a certain group. So what I would say is that the Democratic Party should be nurturing young leaders. They should not be, they should take into account that they cannot be there indefinitely. And they should be creating a pathway for young leaders to be developed, to be emerging so that individuals can see them on the, national stage or on the local stage, and begin to identify them as up and coming voices who have leadership potential. But I also think that a leader has a very unique quality. And we have a system where people can choose who they would like to lead. Nancy Pelosi will have to appeal to her caucus, and they will vote for her. So she can't assign herself that role.
Mhm.
She will have to win that role,
Mhm.
as she has had to win it every 2 years. So I don't know. It will all depend upon what her caucus says. If they think that she is the voice for them in this Congress, then she'll be there. If they don't, they'll put, someone else will
Speaking of this, this next
be
Congress,
there. I do think it would.
go ahead, sorry.
Yes, that's right. If that's right. If this next Congress decides that she is who they want to lead, then she's going to be the speaker. If not, it'll be somebody else. It's that simple.
So, Representative Lewis, do you think, having worked for him for all that time, that he would be in support of increasing the court to 15? That's a big time.
Well, I do think we should consider the fact that the courts have been stacked from a political standpoint. So I think that there are people who feel there is not a neutral representation of ideas on that court, or a balanced representation. And certainly enlarging the court is one way to fix that. So we'll see what happens.
Would you add Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a queen of the resistance?
Wow, she certainly is a queen of the resistance. Yes. And I don't add people readily, but but I do think she could be one of the next group of queens. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Any other women that sit on the court that you would put into that category, including our newest member of the court?
Not yet. Not yet. Not yet.
I have to say, I would put Sandra Day O'Connor on there as probably your first one. Just saying.
She is someone that we could consider. Absolutely.
We talked about Michelle Obama. Would you put Michelle Obama in the category of a queen of the resistance?
Well, it is interesting. I think me personally, of course, I'm not the only decider, and of course, publishing is a business. So I can imagine that there's some people who, for business reasons, might say yes. Personally, I think that Michelle Obama is a reluctant public figure. She's not someone who asked to be in the public eye. And I don't know that she always wants to be in the public eye, but she certainly is a tremendous example. But personally, I don't I don't see her as a queen of the resistance because she hasn't chosen to be on the cutting edge, and her contribution is as a partner, not as a leader per se. That's just my thought.
So when you did your research for these women, what surprised you most about their lives? That they were jumping into it, that they went in, they jumped in with both feet? What was one of the threads, and what was something that surprised you?
Well, what I will say, one of the reasons that I got into this project was because I wanted to be able to tell women, hey, these women are just like you. They have families, they got divorced, they have kids, they have, hopes and dreams, things that didn't work out, they have financial difficulty, all of the things that other people have. And so I wanted to say these are ordinary women just like you who have done these things. But when I got into looking at their lives, I realized actually they weren't ordinary women. They certainly dealt with the circumstances that ordinary women do, but they actually are really quite extraordinary in the way that they prepare. All of them are exceptionally well read, extremely prepared for their work. And that is why they are able to be the kind of persistent leader that they have been for some of them for many decades. There are very few people who know the Congress, for example, like Nancy Pelosi or even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, extremely well prepared when she has to make a statement or is involved in an issue. So they are extraordinary women. That's what I discovered, not ordinary by any means.
Mhm. That is one of the things that I questioned, is to say these are women. There's nothing similar about them. They're different demographics, different race, coming from different locations, different socioeconomic background, even different ages that they enter politics, different levels of experience and education. But the thread that you see is that there's something that's extraordinary about their interest and engagement and desire for to contribute to our
That's
democracy.
right. And their leadership. These women are leaders. And they, because of their capacity to, the thing about politics that's interesting is it is an intellectual job. You are dealing with these huge issues, the financial budget of the United States of America, which is a $1 trillion budget, or you're working on healthcare for 350 million people. It is a very intellectual, substantive kind of work. And to be able to take those huge issues, break them down, and make them accessible to people that you represent is a particular kind of leadership. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody can understand those kinds of huge and difficult issues. And I think that's what we need to begin looking at people in the political ring as. They are executives. They need the intellectual ability, just like when you are hiring for any jobs that you are looking for. You need somebody who's capable of doing the work. And what we need to recognize is that politics is demanding, it is intellectually demanding. We need people there who can understand and process those issues, beyond that, come up with some solutions that can serve you and I. So that's the thing about these ladies. They are quite capable. When you look at Maxine Waters, chairman, the first female chairman of the Financial Services Committee. What do? They regulate the banking industry and all of the financial services industry, the mortgage lenders, and huge businesses, international businesses that interface with the United States and you and me every day. They are regulated in the House of Representatives by Maxine Waters. Not an easy job. She's been on that committee for many, many years. And one of the reasons she became a member of that committee is because she realized the role that the financial services industry plays on the lives of American citizens. So she wanted to be there and understand how to do that, so she could add her ideas into the regulation of those industries. These are powerful ideas, and we cannot just give our country away to people who aren't capable of comprehending some of these things. So I think that is the key. They are some outstanding leaders in their capacity to do this work and have the staying power to lead in that environment.
We have two other suggestions. One is for Shirley Chisholm. Love Shirley Chisholm.
Shirley Chisholm, the first woman, I believe, or one of the first women to run for president of the United States. Absolutely. That is
a good friend of mine, she was her auntie, and she told me stories about having Auntie Shirley as her auntie, which is really powerful woman, very powerful woman. Another suggestion is Barbara Jordan as a queen. What's your take on that?
Interesting, Barb. Now, of course, I remember hearing about Barbara Jordan, and my mother had tremendous regard for her. I don't know everything about her career. I know that she was extremely erudite, incredibly articulate, and an incredible advocate from Texas. I'd have to learn more, but she certainly should be on the list of people we should consider.
Mm-hmm. Is there Well, actually, and I was just looking, you helped Representative Lewis on his book, which is we're seeing now, Across That Bridge, which won an NAACP Image Award. Can you tell? I know this is a little bit of an aside, but could you tell us a little bit about that book and your work on it?
Oh, that's interesting. And it was on the New York Times bestsellers list when he passed away, which is exciting. Congressman Lewis, the purpose of that book, Across That Bridge, was to distill the philosophy of the civil rights movement, really of John Lewis himself, who became really the symbol of that era and a transformative part of American politics, to distill it down in such a way that certain values were transmitted that people could use to formulate the new transformative movements of the future. So that book has a very skeletal orientation where there are certain values that are talked about: faith, reconciliation, truth, etc. in the book. Because I think a lot of people saw the civil rights movement as a series of marches, when actually it was a movement of ministers primarily. When you really think about it, C.T. Vivian, Joseph Lowry, John Lewis, all those people were actually ministers. And then, other ministers too. Rabbi Jerome Prince, there were Catholic bishops involved. So it was a movement of ministers who were deeply concerned about creating democracy that respected human dignity. And politics was one tool for the creation of that, but they really saw a much more profound philosophical and spiritual need. They talked about redeeming the soul of America as part of their work. And so our purpose was to assert the philosophy of the movement of John Lewis, to distill it so that it was in a kind of essential form, not tied to movements and actions. And because of course, any new movement has to respond to the modern time. Can't use the tactics of another day, but you can use the essential ideas of another time to recreate or reform what needs to happen in the new day. So that's the purpose of it, to talk about his philosophy, and hopefully to inspire new day activism.
Do you see today's Black Lives Matter movement and the quest for racial and social justice as a new form of the movement?
Absolutely. And I think Congressman Lewis would say that too. Of course, one of the last things he did was go down to Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C. It was one of the last public actions that he took. I think he was very supportive of the movements of young people, and the idea that they are talking about the ways that public policy, because law enforcement is a kind of public policy, is utilized in ways that are not supportive of the public, is a very important issue that we as a people, as a nation, need to look at and need to try to figure out how we reform that. The only thing that I think I would add is a connection to philosophy. One of the things that was really profound about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, for example, the civil rights era of Congressman Lewis's day. Firstly, I have to say that movement was a cumulative movement. So that means there were all kinds of organizations, the NAACP, the ACLU, other organizations that had a history that had developed in many decades to co-align to create the cumulative movement that became the civil rights movement. So I think in time, where we hear 100, 200, 300 years from now, there would be that kind of accumulation that's going to happen in the future. So that's one thing. We're at the beginning of a new age, and these movements are new movements. So they can't quite be compared exactly to the civil rights era. But I think the thing about the civil rights era that was profound was the philosophy, the connection to many different authors, Walter Rauschenbusch, for example, or many theologians of the time that asserted the need for these kinds of movements and were tied to a history of activism that informed the civil rights movement and made them able to be extremely effective. I think, the benefit of history is that it shortcuts the future, because you can learn from what happened to people in the past. And some of it applies to what's going on right now. So I think that is the thing that ultimately they are going to engage, this whole philosophical understanding and underpinning for the activism that they are engaged in right now.
Well, I thank Brenda Jones, author of the series Queens of the Resistance. I thank you, Dr. Diana Mcrae, for helping us moderate today's discussion. And just wanted to say that I really thank you for this conversation, in that to be able to do this at the Woodrow Wilson House, and part of the Woodrow Wilson House and our philosophy of bringing these conversations to light and examining history through exploring this today is really important to us at what we're doing at the House. And so I thank you for helping contribute to that conversation. So.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, for having such a forward-thinking, progressive way of approaching Wilson's legacy. You're doing some really exciting things at the Woodrow Wilson House. And one thing I'm going to do that you mentioned is the tour of Calorama.
Good.
I'm from DC. I've never had a tour of Calorama. I'm going to come down there and get one of your tours and do it. So thank you for being creative and innovative in your work. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks you, everyone. And remember, next week, go vote. And in 2 weeks, we have Dr. Erica Chapman, That the Blood Be Pure. And it will be a great discussion on African Americans and Native Americans in Virginia. And so I'm welcoming you all to come back in 2 weeks, and we'll see you then. Thank you. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.